Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our semi-usual review crew. We've got Mike Tagliere, who's being held hostage in a cabin currently, if you are watching on the YouTube channel. And then Daniel filling in for our usual review crew member, Scott. Daniel, I would say that you usually have the worst video quality, but this week it's Mike, so congratulations, you're only number 2.
I done come up in the world.
There you go. It's an improvement.
I like it.
All right, so let's get to Week 13. We did talk a little bit before the broadcast how this was a little better than Week 12, maybe a little less weird, but still some weird things nonetheless. So let's just get right to it. First game we got, the Bears and the 49ers. The Bears win 26-6 in a snowy Soldier Field, which, by the way, Mike, aren't you in Chicago? You didn't catch this game, I presume, right? You were doing other better things, right?
Well, it's funny. My wife, she did make me come to mingle with people and everything like that. I am in Chicago, and fortunately, there was a bar at the place where we held the shower, and so.
Hey, that's a nice shower. I'd go to that shower.
It was nice. Well, a lot of my guy friends showed up to see me because I'm obviously back in town. So I kind of hung out with the guys. I was able to watch some of the games, and the Bears game is obviously the one that we saw most of, being in Chicago, and the weather here was horrible today. Like horrible. Snow sticking. There's like 8 inches of snow on the ground. I'm supposed to fly out tomorrow back home, but I don't know if it's going to happen. But regardless, Jordan Howard played fantastic as he's been all year. My concern in this game for Jordan Howard, the only thing I was concerned about was that the 49ers ran away with the game, and that he was kind of, because he's not doing much in the passing game ever since Jeremy Langford and Kadeem Carey are kind of back. But it was the opposite way around, honestly. I loved Carlos Hyde this week, and he played well in the time that he played, but he almost got scripted out of the game to where the 49ers was just so bad. Honestly, they just wanted the second-round draft pick more than we did. So more congratulations on that.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, we played horribly, and Colin Kaepernick sucked, and we're definitely getting a top 2 pick now, so I guess it's time to celebrate. But yeah, like you said, Jordan Howard, obviously a big game. Yeah, there's no question he's the workhorse there now. I mean, Kadeem Carey, I think, had 5 snaps on the day. Howard finished with 117 and 3 touchdowns. I don't know. Let's talk about Kaepernick, though, Daniel. I mean, he was a pretty popular pick going in, whether it was daily or otherwise, because he was on a bit of a streak there. But he was as bad, I think, as you could be this week. He had 4 passing yards, 4, that I didn't stutter, I said 4, on 1 of 5 passing, did add 20 yards rushing on 6 carries, and was eventually benched. So, I don't know, Daniel, what do we make of this? Was it the weather? I mean, it's not like he was playing a good defense, so how do we explain this?
I will say that I went back and forth all week and asked everybody I could find whether I start Kaepernick or Luck this week in a got to make the playoffs game. And, I mean, I don't know what Luck's going to do, but whatever it was, I made the right choice with Luck. That said, what was they called 5 passes. Unless they called a bunch more passes and he audibled out of all of them, they didn't give him a chance to succeed in this game. The weather was awful. They were just going to run the ball. Carlos Hyde ran the ball fine. Kaepernick actually ran the ball fine. Without having seen every play of this game, I'm putting all the blame for this on the play calls. I don't understand benching him unless it was just protecting him, because they didn't give him a chance to succeed. He didn't succeed, but fine, 5 pass attempts in awful weather. Gabbert came in. The weather actually got a little better. My brother and I both commented on how, oh, look, it's clearing up now. Gabbert's going to look good. Even then, he was 4 of 10 for 35 yards. I take nothing away from this game, and unless they make the stupid decision to go back to Gabbert as a starter next week, I still think Kaepernick's QB1 are close.
Well, I want to chime in just because I've been saying for JJ Zacharyson and I had a conversation on Twitter this week, and I told him that, some people said that he was basically getting at most people are letting their bias, getting like their own personal opinion get in their way of fantasy success with Colin Kaepernick. And I said, for me, it was more of, I'm worried about the actual quarterback and his actual talent. Like, I just think that you're going to lose a playoff game and you're going to say, why didn't I realize that Colin Kaepernick's not a very good quarterback? And that's the case that happened this week, Daniel. So the weather, honestly, was pretty standard all day. I know it may have looked different on TV, but it literally snowed straight, and it's still snowing out here. It never stopped. Colin Kaepernick, was it designed pass plays? No, they were running the ball an awful lot, but Kaepernick, when he did take the ball and he was kind of backing up to pass, he was either running the ball, holding onto it too long, and taking a sack, because I want to say he took 4 sacks in this game. He did
5 for the record.
He was awful. He really was. He was bad, and it's Colin Kaepernick. And honestly,
sure.
I was waiting for this to happen. And I think I answered your question. I actually said luck to you just because I can never trust Colin Kaepernick, especially when we're entering the playoffs now where it's a win or go home. So if Colin Kaepernick decides to Colin Kaepernick, then you lose.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you're wrong. You have been saying it all along that you've been waiting for the awful Kaepernick game. If I'm starting a franchise, I don't want Kaepernick. He's not that good. But I still think he's better than Blaine Gabbert, and he's got the fantasy potential. I'm willing to give him a write-off in this game and using him against the Jets next week. If in the league I have two quarterbacks, and it's him, Osweiler, and Mariota, I'm starting him and Mariota unless I get news that Kaepernick's benched.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it was unusual weather. Like, you're not going to have that every week. And I'm not trying to say that played a big factor, but I feel like it played some factor. I mean, those are not great conditions to be throwing a ball around. The ball's going to be slippery. It's not going to be traveling well because it's snowy and windy and all that other stuff. So I think I'm kind of with you, Daniel. I would like to see one more dud before I say, okay, he's probably not good fantasy-wise. But, yeah, it definitely wasn't good overall. Another part of this game that I did want to talk about. So there were questions on what receiving option would develop for Matt Barkley with Alshon Jeffrey suspended, with Eddie Royal hurt. It seems, and I'm not saying it's a great option, but it seems like Josh Bellamy might be it. He did lead the team in targets and receptions and yards this week with 4 for 93 on 6 targets. So, Mike, is there anything there? I mean, waiver wire pickup-wise, or is this passing game still doomed?
No, it's still doomed. Like, honestly, you're not going to get me to trust anybody on the Bears team as a waiver wire addition. Honestly, I was worried about Marquise Wilson. As the week went on, I started to come around just because of the matchup that they had against the 49ers. And then, when I was standing here, Sunday morning as the game started to approach, I saw more and more snow, which was why I leaned towards the running backs in this game. But Marquise Wilson, unfortunately, got hurt. I don't know how much time he's going to miss. That's the reason Bellamy got his opportunity. Eddie Royal was out for this game. Cameron Meredith has been somewhat bad. So, no, I don't think there's going to be any consistency to this Bears team outside of Jordan Howard. So I would just stay away.
Okay.
Well, we say that. Is Jeffrey was only a 4-game suspension. He's missed 3 now. So, in 2 weeks, that's who you want.
I mean, go back to Alshon Jeffrey when he was starting with Brian Hoyer, and he wasn't doing anything with Hoyer either. So I have my concerns about Barkley as a passer. I mean, I actually was looking at that before we got on, and the Titans, before they played the Bears, were over their last 6 games, they had allowed 29 points per game. The 49ers coming into this game, ever since they shut out the Rams in week 1, they're allowing 34 points per game, I think it was. So, honestly, the Bears have played 2 really bad teams, and Matt Barkley, he doesn't impress me. There's a reason that he was a 3rd-string quarterback. So, for me, I just find no consistency. And I have Alshon Jeffrey in one league. I was holding out hope for Cutler to come back, and then Alshon Jeffrey maybe weeks 15 and 16. But as of right now, I just can't.
Well, and to your point, Mike, I think they limited Matt Barkley because they realized he's not good. I mean, he had 18 pass attempts on the day. Not to say they weren't bad. I mean, he completed 11 of them for 192. So, I mean, he was fairly efficient, but I think they also realized they definitely don't want him throwing 30 times a game. I mean, just give it to Jordan Howard 30 times a game like they did and see what happens. So, all right, let's move on to another drubbing. You had the Ravens beat the Dolphins 38-6, snap the Dolphins' 5-game winning streak. Daniel, this was a good game. If you've stuck with Dennis Pitta all season, which some people have, he finally cashed in 9 for 90 and 2 touchdowns after not catching any touchdowns all season, and matched his career high in catches for a season. So, is Dennis Pitta somebody that will be a tight end 1 the rest of the way, or was this a fluke?
I sent out from the PFF Fantasy Twitter account on, I think, Tuesday, that Pitta was the league leader in yards from scrimmage without a score. And then, this happened. So, nice regression there. Pitta is in a pile of tight end 1, tight end 2 guys that is just about everyone below Delaney Walker until you get to, Jesse James. There's about 20 guys in there that are going to have, maybe not this level game, but are going to have 80 yards and a score 1 out of every 5 weeks, and we're going to say, is this guy a TE1 now, or, oh, wait, no, he's not. Pitt is probably near the top of that list because he's going to be targeted so much, but at the same time, he vanished from anything for a while there. He's interesting in the desperation category. That's about it.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I want to ask you about the Dolphins running game and Ajayi specifically. He was playing a tough run defense in Baltimore. He had 60 yards on 12 carries. So he was fairly efficient. I mean, he had 5 yards a carry, but obviously they didn't run the ball that much because they were behind pretty quickly. I think it was 24-0 at halftime. So I want your opinion on Ajayi because that's a pretty good debate topic in the fantasy world. Is he just a guy and a function of the system, or is he a guy that's better than that? Where do you fall on that?
No, I think he's an above-average talent. I think he's a really strong player. And this week, honestly, this surprises me kind of looking at this because I didn't get to see any of this game. But you see his 5.1 yards per carry against Baltimore. Baltimore, I want to say there's been just one running back all year to average more than 4 yards per carry against them. So this is extremely impressive. And the fact that he did it, he averaged 4.7 yards after contact. So you're basically everything he got, he earned. He broke 7 tackles on 12 carries, which is – you can't really beat that in terms of an elusive rating. I also see that he caught 6 passes, which is good. I tend to think that part of the reason that he got back on track is one, because he's just obviously breaking tackles left and right, but another is because he got 2 of the 3 starting offensive linemen back. Mike Pouncey is still the one that's missing, but obviously it helps. But you have to worry about game scripts like this. But Baltimore, again, this was a tough defense. I mentioned it, I think, on last week's show that even it's not just from a DFS standpoint that I was worried about starting Ajayi in season-long leagues this week. And he delivered a performance, honestly, that warranted a start. So I definitely believe in the guy's talent. You could see our PFF analysts, they graded him extremely positive today. So, Jay Ajayi is definitely – it seems like he stood up decently for a playoff run, but I want to say he does have a couple tough matchups coming up.
Well, and I can't find the tweet, and I'm certainly not claiming credit for it, but I saw somewhere where I think Ajayi had 7 missed tackles on his 12 carries this game. I mean, just this game alone.
It's insane. You can't top that from an elusive standpoint.
No, I mean, he's very good just by himself in a vacuum. So, I'm starting to think he's just better than the system around him. One more point on this game that I did want to talk about. So, Daniel, obviously, Devante Parker has been on a bit of a run lately. He's developed as the number 1 target in Miami at least the last month or so. But this week, it kind of regressed. So you had Jarvis Landry, who was by far the leading target getter on Miami with 14. Parker only had 4. But Parker was less than 100% health-wise. So was this a function of his health and not being 100% or what? Or is this something that we should just expect out of Miami and just sort of playing the matchups and going back and forth between Landry and Parker?
I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of the back and forth between them, but I'm chalking that up for Parker to his injury this week. If it happens again next week, we'll talk about a trend, but right now I'm just saying, they weren't even sure he was going to play until 10 or 11 o'clock this morning. It was a real dicey situation. I think they kind of had him chambered, and they were going to go more Landry and Stills, and then Parker came out and said, I'm ready to go, so they worked him in a little bit, but they just weren't going to give him a full load.
Yeah. Because it was odd because a lot of people had Parker in their lineups thinking, hey, he's finally turned a corner. But he got hurt again, which he has been most of his career so far, and it was kind of disappointing. So, all right, let's move on to Bengals and Eagles. The Bengals win 32-14. Mike, and I usually would ask Scott this because he is our workhorse running back expert, but what's going on with Jeremy Hill, man? Like, he was handed the starting job, handed the workhorse role on a silver platter when Bernard went down. Ended up leading the Bengals today with 23 carries, but had all of 33 yards. Did add a touchdown to salvage some value, but only added 2 catches on top of that. So what is the deal with Hill, man? Like, is it him? Is it the offense? Because, look, everyone around him today did pretty well in Cincinnati.
Yeah, no, this has become a trend with Jeremy Hill, one where I'm really concerned about. From like a dynasty standpoint, last year we saw him struggle, and I thought maybe there was an injury that we didn't see or something like that. But now that you're looking at it this year, there's really only 2 games this entire season where he's played well. And if you look at him, one was against the Cleveland Browns, where he had 168 yards and a touchdown, and the other one was that game against Denver, where he scored 2 touchdowns and had 97 yards. Outside of those 2 games, he has not even reached 4 yards per carry in any single game. Looking at his game logs, actually 7 of his last 8 games now, he's averaged less than 2 yards after contact. So for a guy that is supposed to be the big bruising back, the 1-2 down back, the goal line back, he's playing horribly. He's not doing his job, essentially. He's only broken 18 tackles on the year running the ball on 170 carries. We just talked about Ajayi, who broke 7 tackles this week on 12 carries against the Ravens. So there's definitely issues with Jeremy Hill. It's to the point now where I'm actually questioning whether or not he has any longevity in this league. It's just now 2 years running. You just can't keep doing this. There's 23 for 33. It's become like all too familiar of a line for Jeremy Hill lately.
So one last question on that. Is Rex Burkhead, which I can't believe we're talking about this guy, is he anything to look at on the waiver wire this week as we go into the fantasy playoffs, or do we want to just hope that Andy Dalton chucks it 50 times a game?
I think if you're desperate, because you're going to get a guy that's probably going to see 10 looks a game, whether it be a couple carries and 5-6 targets per game. I think that's what you're kind of headed towards. It's not an exciting option at all, but we're talking about like teams out there, Daniel, that may have like, let's say they have James Starks at running back. And today I think I saw that he was at 4 carries he had the entire day against the Houston.
For 1 yard.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. He's been bad all year, but James Starks was a guy that people were probably going to rely on as a flex player. Maybe not like a high ceiling, but a low floor. So honestly, there's a lot of people that are hurting out there at running back. When you rank running backs, like when I go there to rank running backs and you get outside like the top 20 guys, you're just like, this is awful.
When I get outside the top 20 guys, it's a crapshoot at that point, and you're looking for guys who might score a touchdown. Rex Burkhead's not going to score a touchdown. If they have to run the ball in and it's close, Hill's going to get it. If they have to throw it, it's going to be Eifert. So if you're, the upside for Burkhead is 50 yards from scrimmage, 60 yards from scrimmage, absolute best case scenario. Whereas you have someone, just to pick a name, Capri Bibbs might only get 3 carries, but one of them could be a 75-yard touchdown. Or Kyle Juszczyk out of Baltimore. He's going to catch 4 passes out of every 3 games, but he might get a touchdown of it. I'd rather use those guys than Burkhead just for the chance of a touchdown. Burkhead has no upside to me.
I would take Burkhead. I just think in a standard format, I don't want any part of them. But if you're talking like a PPR format, I think Burkhead could feel like a flex type role where honestly it could be similar. I mean, not as good as Gio Bernard, but Gio Bernard light. Gio Bernard wasn't great this year. But I'm talking about in a PPR league, you could probably put him in your flex and expect 8 to 10 points a week.
Okay. All right. Let's keep it moving. Let's go to Packers and the Texans. The Packers win 21-13. And another snow game, which was very fun to watch if you were watching from the comfort of your heated home today. We had Jordy Nelson, Daniel, who honestly probably had the best game out of anybody fantasy-wise of this game. 8 for 118 and a touchdown. He was going against a defense that, quite honestly, was playing receivers, at least from a fantasy standpoint, pretty well. They were giving up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points. So how was Nelson able to do it? I mean, he broke away, got behind the defense on that one long bomb touchdown. But he had a lot of shorter passes earlier in the day too. So, is this at the sacrifice of Devante Adams, or is it just Jordy Nelson being Jordy Nelson?
I mean, good wide receiver on a team with 4 or 5 legitimate options. You're going to shut Jordy Nelson down sometime if you focus on him, but if you let your focus slip at all, if you start focusing on Devante Adams, who only caught 1 of his 7 targets today, Jordy Nelson's going to do stuff. You can't keep somebody like that down that long. So, I mean, if you get him in a situation where they're facing Denver or maybe Minnesota, I'll talk about things, but it's got to be the cream of the crop for me to even consider downgrading Nelson too much.
Okay. Of the running attack for Green Bay, Mike, we had of all people to lead the team in carries this week, Christine Michael with 9. Now, he wasn't very efficient. He had 19 yards on 9 carries, so it was very Jeremy Hill-esque. But what do you make of this going forward for the Packers? I mean, it seems like they really want to develop Michael into that rest of season substitute for Eddie Lacy. Is there anything there?
I don't think so. Christine Michael and James Starks, looking at it, they struggled today because of the offensive line in a lot of ways. You look at it, Christine Michael averages 2.1 yards per carry, but 2.6 after contact, which means he was met behind the line of scrimmage, on average, a half a yard behind the line of scrimmage. That's never a good thing. When you see a running back average more yards after contact than they did yards per carry, that means the offensive line didn't do their job. James Starks was a similar situation. He was actually hit a yard behind the line of scrimmage. The reason that I don't think anything sticks here, the reason that I'm not excited about Christine Michael, is not because I don't think that he's semi-talented. I think it's because of the offense and what they do. Aaron Rodgers, the hamstring limitations and stuff like that, it's a little worrisome. I didn't get to see I did see some of this game. I didn't get to see too much, but I think that Ty Montgomery offers I think he's a better all-around option. I think that James Starks is okay in the passing game. He can't run the ball. Kristen Michael, not a great passing down back, but he runs the ball better than James Starks. I think with Ty Montgomery, you get a lot of versatility to the offense. We have Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball 40-plus times a game. This week, he didn't really need to, but going forward, I think Ty Montgomery is the guy who's going to reemerge. I just don't see any way that they keep him off the field. He's just outproducing everybody when he's out there. And if they don't go back to him, I just think that that's bad coaching.
Okay. One more note on this game, Andy. We had a DeAndre Hopkins sighting. He did catch his first touchdown since week 5, which is just depressing if you think about it. Anything there? I mean, where do you stand on Hopkins? We have sort of written him off. He's obviously not wide receiver 1 or even 2 material, I think, at this point. But any chance of a late season run with him?
Who's his quarterback? Is it Brock Osweiler?
I believe so, yes.
I mean, Hopkins is still a good player. If you give him enough looks, he's going to do things eventually with it. But, most of his production last year was before the catch. He didn't do a lot after the catch, and Osweiler's not giving him much to work with. If I have him, I'm still running him out there. In the league I do have him, I'm still running him out there. I'm not excited about it, and I'm not counting on, I'm thinking mid to low end wide receiver 2 at this point. You're stuck. If you have him, I can't imagine benching him. Depending on your options, obviously, but I'm not excited.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go from one sad story to another. And the Broncos-Jaguars game. The Broncos win 20-10. Ugh. I think the best fantasy play this week was the Broncos defense, if I'm not mistaken, with that pick 6. I don't know. Let's talk about Devante Booker first, Mike, because I feel like he is also Jeremy Hill-esque, meaning – he's been given the role of a lifetime. He has no competition for that workhorse role, and he's just not producing. He had his probably worst game of the year this year. He did score a touchdown, but he had 18 carries for 35 yards. What's the deal with Booker? Because I looked it up. The Broncos have the 7th best run blocking unit in the league. So it's not the line. You can't use that excuse with him. So what is it?
No, you can't use that excuse with him. And, it's funny because, once the C.J. Anderson injury happened, and there were people already whispering that Booker was going to overtake his job. I never bought into that. C.J. Anderson is one of the better running backs in this league, honestly, not just on the Broncos, but he's one of the best in the league. So I think what Booker does best is catch the ball out of the backfield. And it's really, really odd because the Broncos decided not to use him there at all the past couple of weeks. And it's a shame they're not playing to the kid's strengths because he's not running the ball well. Ever since he's taken over as a starter, there hasn't been a single game over 3.3 yards per carry. And they've had some good opponents in there that he should have been able to run on. You go against New Orleans and Jacksonville and you average basically cumulatively between the 2.5 yards per carry. As soon as C.J. Anderson went down, there was dynasty leagues that I'm in where people were trading like a late first-round pick for Booker, and I'm like, what are you doing? And some people were defending it, and there's really no defense to it. I didn't see he was a 4th round. I think he was a 4th-round pick by the Broncos. He's not a flash player. He's not a workhorse running back, and I think you're seeing that. And yes, you said it. They have a decent offensive line. C.J. Anderson was doing work behind there. Did he have some off games? Of course. But when you have a stretch of 5 games like Booker's had as the starter, seeing as much work as he has, he's seen at least 17 carries in 5 of the last 6 games. So he's had plenty of time. And over those last 6 games, a lot of it was on the offensive line because during that time, he's only broken 7 tackles the entire time. So my biggest concern with the Broncos is the way that they're using him because I saw this week he only had, I think, 1 target. The last couple of weeks, it's just that you see it trending down, which is really odd to me because the one thing I did see out of him coming into the NFL, I thought that he was going to be a solid receiving back, and they're not even using him there, so it's definitely worrisome.
Well, so Daniel, let's talk about the quarterback position there because is there anything to the thinking that the defenses playing the Broncos are just not giving any respect to the passing game? I mean, I feel like they didn't a whole lot with Trevor Siemian. He was injured, obviously. Paxton Lynch went today, but he was just as bad, if not worse, than Trevor Siemian's ever been all season. 12 of 24 for 104 yards, no picks, no touchdowns. So is it just defenses, selling out against the run or what?
I mean, that's a big part of that is that Siemian has been not good, and Lynch is worse. Lynch graded out as our Fourth worst quarterback today, beating only Tannehill, Eli Manning, and Jared Goff, which is a sad golf foursome. He's played 3 games and has a total of 393 passing yards. Lynch might have a career. He's young. He wasn't supposed to play this year anyway. He was a project. It's not in 2016. It might not be in 2017. If you're facing the Broncos and you're just looking at this team, Jacksonville has a reasonably good pass defense to begin with. There's nothing that scares you at all. You're going to load up to stop Booker and assume Lynch can't hit his wide receivers, and that's what happened. I think Mike is right. This is more or less what Booker is as a runner, but I also don't think he stood a chance today.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get to the rest of Week 13. All right, everyone, welcome back. Let's move on to Patriots and Rams. Mike, I want to say the big story here, at least for me, was Malcolm Mitchell continuing to be a big part of the offense, or even bigger part than he has been the last couple of weeks. I think he, if I read it correctly, led the team in snaps at receiver. He was second on the team in stats as far as receptions and yards go, 8 for 82. He did have 10 targets. I mean, where do you put Mitchell, I guess, rest of the way is the bigger question. I don't think he's going to be available on anyone's waiver wire anymore, but where are you slotting him if you're going into the fantasy playoffs the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think it's really telling. They're trying to find a way to get him on the field, because that's something I was taking a peek at before we came on, and I just pulled it up again to make sure I checked the numbers again. And basically what they had them doing, Edelman and Chris Hogan, they kind of alternated in the slot. Chris Hogan had typically, like this year, he had been playing almost all of his snaps at left wide receiver. This week he played 48% of the snaps in the slot. I don't know if that's wrong, but so basically they're trying to move around Chris Hogan to get him in the slot more, which would in turn allow Malcolm Mitchell to get on the field more at left wide receiver. Fortunately for them, that was the best matchup on the field this week, where it really played into his strengths. My concern about Malcolm Mitchell coming into this week was the snaps, because last week Chris Hogan outsnapped him. It was more than double the snaps. So when you mentioned that he played the most snaps, it made me do a double take. Really? Did that really happen? And looking at it, Hogan played just one more, but you're right. He's right up there with Hogan. Julian Edelman was actually third on the team in wide receiver snaps. So, yeah, I think you have to consider him a wide receiver 3. Now, he is going to have some volatility. I wish I was able to see more of this game, because I'd be curious as to your input, your guys's, because if you were able to see this game, did Tom Brady look like Tom Brady again? Because the last couple weeks he hadn't really looked like anything special. But seeing 11 targets, yeah, you have to take notice. With Rob Gronkowski gone, it's become a trend now. Malcolm Mitchell's performing. He was doing it on limited snaps, and now that he's playing all the snaps, he's definitely in play for wide receiver 3, though there might be some volatility. But did you guys get to see this game, much of it?
I didn't. No, I didn't.
I'm not going to watch the Patriots run over a high school team. I saw a few minutes of it.
Just on general principle.
Yeah, there was nothing exciting there. I will say, you said that Mitchell's not going to be available on waiver wires. I just looked in my Yahoo league. He's only 29% owned. He's still out there, and I don't think he's going to be a surefire starter every week. But if you can pick him up as a wide receiver 3 or a flex play, right matchups, if things line up, I think he's absolutely worth a pickup.
Yeah,
interesting. Okay, so let's talk about Rob Gronkowski a little bit, and essentially people's roles going forward without him. Martellus Bennett obviously was a popular choice in daily leagues this week. Only saw 4 targets, caught 2 of them for 4 yards. Dion Lewis, who a lot of people thought might get some more reps and get some more attention without Rob Gronkowski, only 9 touches this week, 2 more than James White. It seemed like, Daniel, I mean, you've got Julian Edelman, who I think at this point is the only bankable receiver in the Patriots offense. After that, though, I mean, look, unless Mitchell truly does develop something consistently, it's all over the place. Like Mike mentioned, you've got Hogan, who they're moving around now. You've got Amendola, who's still there. And then you've still got White and Lewis, who no one can make heads or tails on who's the starting passing back there. So what do we do with all that?
Hope. The Patriots you're going to have in your lineup every week right now are Brady, Blunt, and Edelman. Lewis and Mitchell and Hogan and maybe White are the next tier down. of, start him in the right matchup, if you're at the right level of desperate and all that. Bennett, I don't even want Bennett. He's not healthy. He has a history of fading in the second half, not the second half, even after the first quarter of the games. I sent this out almost 2 months ago now, but the last 5 years, he's had in first 4 games of the season, so 20 games total over 5 years, 13 touchdowns and 9.5 fantasy points a game. The rest of the season, 43 games, 7 touchdowns, 4.5 fantasy points per game. The dude is a hot starter and fades as the season goes on every year. He's a big name in a good offense, and it's a crap position. So if you need someone, Bennett's about as good a shot as anybody in that crap tier. But I'm not going out of my way to get him. I'm not going to use him in DFS. I'm not going to use him if I have other options. He's nothing right now.
Mike, what about you? Do you agree it's Brady, Blunt, and Edelman as the only surefire starters in that offense?
I would agree to a certain extent, honestly. But when you get towards, so not everybody is fortunate enough to own Travis Kelce or Delaney Walker or some of those other top options. So tight end's a really, really tough position this year. I mean, we saw Antonio Gates last week, 0 targets, 0 catches. So it seems like anybody. Eric Ebron, he had a big fat 0 on Thanksgiving. So it's like you look around the tight end landscape and you figure if Tom Brady is going to be playing well, then you have to consider all of his options, especially a full-time tight end in his offense, which, even if we went back to last year, we saw Scott Chandler do fine in that role. So I do think Bennett can produce. I think he may have been playing through a little bit of an injury today. I know his ankle's been bothering him. He left the game last week with it. So I wouldn't say you're excited, but he's definitely one of those guys that you want to plug in because he's got a good shot at a touchdown every single week. And honestly, there's not many tight ends in the league that have 2 touchdown upside. He's one of them.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll stipulate that, but at the same time, he hasn't scored a touchdown since week 5. He has 50 or fewer yards in 6 or 7 games. I mean, yeah, he has upside because of his offense and because he's a good player, but it's scary to me.
But would you rather own Vance McDonald or something?
I don't think it's clear either way. I've thought about it enough. I could go either way on that.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. And we won't even talk about Jared Goff because it's just too depressing. And if that's not depressing enough, you've got Jeff Fisher's extension, which is even worse. So we're just going to move on from any
what a weird franchise.
Poor Ross Miles of PFF, of our own PFF. He just must be super depressed. So.
Love you, Ross.
Yeah, I know. He's going to need it. All right, let's move on to Lions and Saints. Lions win 28-13. Mike, I want your take on this because, we've talked Drew Brees plenty in podcasts before. 326 yards, so typical Drew Brees at home, but 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. His first game without a touchdown at home since 2009. So what was the deal here? Was it just defense? Was it his receivers letting him down? What was the deal here?
That's a good question, Moore. I wish that I had the answer to it. I'm going to dive into this some more. That's one of the games I'm going to make sure I go back and I actually watch to see what kind of happened. It's funny. I'm actually in the middle of writing my defensive streamer piece that'll go up tomorrow morning. And the Lions, little teaser for you guys, the Lions are going to be in it. They're going to be playing against the Bears next week. And looking at the Lions defense a little closer, a lot of people have been talking about Matthew Stafford as MVP and all that stuff, but their defense deserves a lot of credit. You have to go back all the way to week 6 to find a team that scored more than 20 or 23 points against them. So they've been stepping up on defense. Opponents' plays are down, where I think coming into this game, they were only 61 plays per game, which was like the 5th lowest in the NFL. And honestly, I talked about Drew Brees a little bit and saying my only concern about Drew Brees this week was that Detroit, with the way they play offense and how they've been limiting the play count on the opposing offense to make Brees almost force it a little bit. And I want to say, so basically, while I was at the baby shower today, I was checking my phone, obviously, throughout and checking stats and whatnot. And I want to say at halftime, Drew Brees had maybe 70 yards passing. And I knew he'd turn it on in the second half, but I was really, really shocked to see him score 0 touchdowns. But again, when you look a little bit closer at this Detroit defense, it's really amazing what they've been able to do despite missing some of their stars. I know Slay missed some time. They're supposed to get DeAndre Levy back any week now. I thought he was going to play this week, but it appears they might get him back next week for the Bears game. That's a division game. They're going to be at home. So the Detroit Lions have really stepped up, but this is one I'm really curious. I don't know if this whole Brandon Cooks thing, if they feel like they're forcing players, Mark Ingram missing practice time. I don't know, but It's like I said with Russell Wilson last week, though. I wrote an article and said that we have to understand sometimes that these guys aren't robots and they're not always going to perform the way that we expect them to or the way that they should because of a matchup. And this might just be a situation where Drew Brees just had a bad day. He might have been whatever the case may be, but he's just not a robot. So he's entitled to a bad game. And unless it becomes a trend, I'm not going to look too much into it, though.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about these Saints receivers. You had Brandon Cooks, who you mentioned. Actually led the team in targets this week with 9. So, Daniel, was this a case of the squeaky wheel, gets the grease? Or, should we have sort of expected a bounce-back game from Cooks anyway?
I mean, some of it's regression, but I don't think this is a squeaky wheel situation because I'd have to look at the exact numbers, but at least half of Cook's production came down the stretch when they were just desperate. Early on in the game, it was a little bit of Fleener, and other than that, he was spreading the ball around. This game was really weird. Zach Zenner was the leading rusher for the Lions. T.J. Jones was the number 2 receiver. Kobe Fleener had the most receiving yards for the Saints. I don't know what to make of this game other than the Lions are better than I thought. The Saints are as bad as they could really be right now. They're as bad as a team could be and have Drew Brees as their quarterback. But, how are you going to have Cooks, Thomas, and Snead and have them combine for 150 yards in this matchup? I get that the Lions' defense is better than we thought, but that just doesn't compute. You take out the last drive, they combined for about 105 yards. That doesn't make sense to me.
Now, what do you guys – I want to ask you guys both a question real quick before we move on. So what do you guys think about the idea that the Saints are almost doing too much? Like they're trying to change too much, too often, every single week where they may not have to do that. Like they have their strengths. Why not play to them? Because I'm even looking at it now. Kobe Fleener, 41 snaps. Josh Hill back down to 10. Like it was the opposite.
Well, Hill got hurt.
Oh, he did. That makes more sense.
I don't know if he left for the whole game, but he left with an injury for at least a little while.
That makes more sense because I was like looking at this, and I mean we've seen it though. The reason I thought that it was just a normal Saints day because Kobe Fleener in weeks 10 and 11, he was up to like 60% of the snaps, and then it jumped back, and then went back down to like 20%, and now you see him up again. It just, I don't know. It's almost like they're just trying to do too much every single week to change. Brandon Coleman, Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas is the number 1 on this team. Willie Snead had the best matchup of any wide receiver in this game against Quandre Diggs, and he catches 1 pass. Is that what he caught? I think
2.
It's not very good times in New Orleans, but like I said, it may have been just a bad game on Drew Brees' part.
Yeah, I'm going to chalk it more to that. I think I don't think they're trying too much. I think they know what they have. And look, Drew Brees obviously is one of the best quarterbacks of all time, I would say. And I think he is smart enough, and they are smart enough not to sort of get in his way. And look, he directs that offense. I mean, I don't care what anyone says. He knows what the deal is. So I don't think it's a case of that, but. It is weird though, and I don't know if maybe they're just transitioning to Thomas instead of Cooks, and Cooks just isn't having it and kind of hanging on and trying not to give that roll up or what. But I don't know. I'm with you. I think it's more just a case of a bad day, and I think they'll probably resolve this Cooks thing in the off season. I mean, look, there were rumors that they probably are looking at trading him, which again, it's just rumor at this point. But I mean, you could be onto something. I mean, hey, they have too many mouths to feed there, and it might free some space up there to remove a guy, especially if they can get a decent pick for it. So, all right, one more note on this game, Mike. So we had Marvin Jones, who was a very popular pick going into this game, declared inactive before the game, which meant Golden Tate had a very good game in his place, 8 for 145 and a touchdown. So was this a case of this was Marvin Jones's game that Golden Tate stole, or was Golden Tate going to have this good a game anyway?
I think Golden Tate was going to have a good game regardless. I think it may have given him a slight bump. I thought that some of that production may have gone to Theo Riddick, but it's almost like he stole some of Marvin Jones' stuff, and then he also stole some from Theo Riddick because Riddick underperformed and for what has become his standard. I think he caught 5 passes and 1 was a touchdown, but at the same time, he wasn't really Theo Riddick. I don't know if he's still playing a little bit injured, if that ankle's bothering him, but Golden Tate, honestly, ever since people were dropping him over the first, 4 weeks of the season, Golden Tate has become a stud wide receiver too, kind of like a lot of people projected him to be coming into the year. So it was a good matchup for him. So yeah, it was a little bit of Jones, a little bit of Riddick, but fantastic game nonetheless.
Yeah. All right, let's keep it moving. We've got Chiefs and Falcons, which was a pretty decent game, actually. Chiefs win 29-28 on a 2-point conversion in the last 3 or 4 minutes or so, and a pick, I guess 2 is what you would call it, from Eric Berry. So let's first talk about Daniel Spencer Ware, who had, depending on the context, a good game. He did have 2 touchdowns, but only had 14 carries for 29 yards. I did look it up. The Chiefs as a team only had 48 plays on the day when they usually have 63. So literally 15 less plays than they're used to. So as far as Spencer Ware goes, what do you make of this game? I mean, he but he was playing a defense that gives up a ton of fantasy points. I mean, he was ticketed to have a very big day, and he was saved by the 2 touchdowns, but other than that, not a great game. So is this, a Falcons defense that just got lucky? Is Spencer Ware breaking down? What's the deal here?
I mean, Spencer Ware is an upper tier running back 2. In that range, he'll fluctuate a little above, a little below that, and those guys you can't rely on to take advantage of the right matchups every time. If you started him, you're fine with 16 standard points, 17 maybe. He's a good running back. He's not a great running back. I would have liked a little more out of him, but I think this is about who he is. You take the touchdowns here. I think in another game he's going to have 80 yards and no touchdowns, and it's going to be about the same.
Yeah. All right. On the other side of the field, Mike, we had the return of Tevin Coleman, at least to a full complement of snaps for him. And the Falcons, who continue to like to just jerk with fantasy players all season, gave 12 carries to Tevin Coleman, for 49 yards. Devante Freeman, though, saved the day with 15 carries of his own, 56 yards, did add 2 touchdowns, and was the more targeted running back between Coleman and Freeman. So are we back to, Freeman having to share the load with Coleman, and where do we put both of them the rest of the way?
Well, Coleman was a guy who was due for some major touchdown regression. He was scoring once every, at one point, it was once every 9.7 touches, which is it's unsustainable. There's no way it could happen. And meanwhile, Devonta Freeman on the other side was averaging 1 touchdown every 30 touches. So it was bound to go the other way. In the last 2 weeks, we've seen Freeman now score 4 touchdowns. It was pretty impressive to see him score 2 rushing touchdowns in this game against a Kansas City defense that, since they've had Justin Houston back, they've kind of turned a corner. The secondary is where they should have been attacked, and honestly, the Falcons just didn't do their job in this game. Honestly, I don't feel like they attacked the weaknesses, which is really weird because Julio Jones, that's somebody obviously I pay a lot of attention to, and he had 4 catches for 52 yards in the first drive, and the rest of the game they threw him the ball 5 times. Is that what it was? 4 times, 5 times the rest of the game?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what the Falcons were doing here. It's almost like that thing. You just get too cute. You get to the point where you just think that you have to do so many different things. You have the best wide receiver in the game. The best wide, and I'm not afraid to say that Julio Jones is the best wide receiver in the game. In my opinion, you can't match up with him. And especially when you're talking about Steven Nelson, Phillip Gaines, it kind of stunk because he was a healthy scratch for this game. He would have been torched by regardless whoever he faced up against, but Jones would have seen some of him in coverage. So they just you look at it, 8 targets. You don't give elite wide receivers 8 targets. And how many times this year have we seen Julio Jones see fewer than 10 targets? A lot. Last year, they peppered him with targets. And it's not to say that they haven't done a better thing this year, but they're almost to the point where now it's kind of like you're misusing the best weapon you have on your team and not getting the ball enough. You throw him the ball 8 times, he gets you 113 yards. But it's not enough.
Yeah.
When you were talking earlier, Mike, about the Saints being the team trying to do too much, the Falcons are who I was thinking of. After several weeks in a row of Taylor Gabriel being just this monster gadget player, he played about the same number of snaps this week as Aldrick Robinson.
Yeah, that's great.
Their big drive attempting to win the game was a big play to Levine Toilolo, a pass in the end zone targeted to Justin Hardy, and then a touchdown to Aldrick Robinson. And it worked, and that's great. But why the hell are you trying to win the game on Toilolo, Robinson, and Hardy when you have Julio Jones and Devante Freeman? Granted, it's worked for most of the season, but
I'm pretty sure Julio got hurt towards the end.
He was on and off the field there near the end, but there were times he was on the field, and like Mike said, they just weren't targeting him enough. And you know, if I'm happy for him that it worked out. It should have worked out here, other than the fluke pick too. But it's, if you have these stud players and you're using Aldrick Robinson to win the game, I just don't think that's a recipe for long-term success.
Well, it's somewhat of a miracle. Julio Jones is averaging over 100 yards a game, and he has 3 games over 10 targets this year. That's it. That's stupid. I'm sorry. That's all I can say about that.
We'll need to tweet at Kyle Shanahan when this is
no, Mike's right. We have a guy who came close to setting the all-time number of targets last year, had 1,000,000,007 yards, and they're like, no, let's throw it to him less. Like, we don't want to run him. No, throw the ball to Julio Jones. Let him do all the stuff.
That's the thing, is I think Matt Ryan's done it right. He spread the ball around enough, but at the same time, you have to say, okay, well, I'm going to spread the ball around, but he's still going to get a majority of the targets, and just not. Just not. It's not fair.
Okay.
We're being deprived of Julio Jones' talent.
All right, let's move on to the afternoon games. We have the Raiders beating the Bills 38-24. The Raiders scored 29 unanswered points. I think all in the third quarter, by the way. It was, I think, 14-9 maybe at halftime or something like that. But let's get to the Bills. First, Daniel, we had LaShawn McCoy, who just ran wild today. 130 yards on 17 carries, and then added 7 receptions for 61 yards. There's not really a lot of analysis here. Like, he's pretty good in a top 3 fantasy running back this year. What do you say?
He is. The only problem you have with him is they kept letting Mike Gillislee score the touchdowns. And I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But, McCoy has 191 yards from scrimmage, but Gillislee gets both rushing touchdowns. Well, no, Gillislee gets 2 and Taylor gets 1. As long as they're going to be spreading the wealth like that in the running game, McCoy's going to have a little bit more of a cap on his fantasy production than Ezekiel Elliott or David Johnson. But McCoy's, it's the top group is Elliott, Johnson, DeMarco Murray, Le'Veon Bell, and LaShawn McCoy. It's probably and maybe Melvin Gordon. You have 6 guys, and he's right up there in that group. He just doesn't quite have the ceiling of the rest because Gillislee's there doing that.
Yeah, what do we make of that, Mike? Is it just wanting to keep McCoy's legs fresh for the rest of the season? Or, it's not like Gillislee is, an elite talent. I think we can say that. He's been good this season, but it's not like, hey, he's knocking on the door to take the starting job anytime soon. So is it just a matter of spelling McCoy, or what's the deal there?
He's a more of a downhill runner, and that's what it really comes down to. Is it's actually pretty smart on their part. LaShawn McCoy is a bit of a jumper. He's willing to take a 5-yard loss in order to get a 10-yard gain. And when you're on the goal line, that doesn't really play for coaches. So for me, I'm okay with them doing it. It stinks kind of for fantasy production, but it's the smart thing to do. Gillislee is so good on the goal line, and that's obviously you're seeing him do it. Tyrod Taylor, I didn't get to see that play. It may have been a scramble or something like that, but it really just comes down to LaShawn McCoy and the type of player he is. You kind of have to live with some of his risk in order to get the upside that he gives you every single week. But on the goal line, you really don't need to do any of that nonsense when you have Mike Gillislee.
Right. All right, one more note on this game, Mike, because you and I are both Amari Cooper truthers and empathizers. He had exactly 4 targets in this game behind Seth Roberts, Michael Rivera, and Latavius Murray. Michael Crabtree led the Raiders with 7 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown. So, and look, Cooper had a touchdown, which did save his fantasy day. But what is the deal here, man? It's been a stretch of Crabtree being the clear top target there in Oakland.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people I got trying to figure out who was going to cover who in this game, because with Ronald Darby missing this game, it kind of changed up some of their what to expect. Nobody knew what to expect. They thought that Crabtree was going to get top coverage from Gilmore, that they were going to slide Gilmore to his side. I'm like, yeah, and then forget about Amari Cooper. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So for me, I downgraded Amari Cooper a little bit. I upgraded Michael Crabtree. I still stand by the fact that I think Amari Cooper is the best wide receiver on that team. He's so fun to watch, but at the same time, it is frustrating because Derek Carr he's taking advantage of the matchups. If Amari Cooper has a tough matchup against Stephon Gilmore, whoever it is on the field, if they have a cornerback who's going to shadow him around the field, it's not going to be ideal for Amari Cooper and his fantasy owners. Michael Crabtree just reaped the benefits of that today. It's honestly a situation where when I was doing my pre-draft rankings, before the season even started on Amari Cooper, I had him there. My projections actually had him up at like number 9. And I couldn't rank him there because I knew Michael Crabtree was going to steal more goal line work than I wanted him to. And that's kind of played into the fact, like, I don't know the length of Amari Cooper's touchdown that he had today, but what I do know is that coming into the game, he had seen 13 red zone targets on the year, and he hadn't caught a single one for a touchdown. Meanwhile, Seth Roberts, I think, has 3, and Michael Crabtree had 5. So it's weird. It's almost like Amari Cooper is allergic to the end zone in the red zone. He relies on the big plays a little bit more than he probably should, but he's more of a dynasty player to me, whereas Michael Crabtree will fade as his career goes on, and Amari Cooper will emerge. Next year will be his 3rd year in the league, but it's going to be frustrating for fantasy owners. That's all I can really say about it.
Yeah, well, and to that point, as long as they have an effective running game and they can keep sort of, driving and having these long drives where they end up in the red zone and they're not, chucking it from 40 yards out, Crabtree's going to get a lot more opportunities. That's just how it is in the red zone. They're going to be in the red zone a lot because Murray is running it pretty well now. And another note, I think it's safe to say if DeAndre Washington is a healthy scratch, you can fire up Latavius Murray because he's going to get a ton of carries that day. So, all right, let's move on. Time is running out. We've got the Steelers and the Giants. The Steelers win 24-14. Daniel, we talk about the Giants' running game every week, and every week they do this to us where they split it pretty much evenly. Well, I should say recently there was a stretch with Jennings that was the workhorse, but this week you had Paul Perkins with 7 carries and Rashad Jennings with 6. Perkins was actually the more efficient runner this week, getting 38 yards on 7 carries, while Jennings had 19 on 6. Did add a touchdown in the receiving game, though. He did add 6 for 34. So, is Jennings the clear-cut running back there in New York, and should we just give up on the Paul Perkins dream for this season?
I think you're going to have to. It's weird that Jennings was the only running back who got any targets in the passing game. They have half a dozen running backs in that team, and Jennings has never exactly been known as a pass-catching specialist, but Perkins' deficiencies as a pass blocker are really going to cost him. I think in the long run, maybe he'll get over him, but right now he's not a good pass blocker. Jennings excels in that, and if he can block, he's going to be on the field for the passing downs, and that's going to get him the usage. I don't think we have anything beyond a low-end running back 2 or a flex play out of him, but it's way more than you're going to get out of Perkins or Bobby Rainey or Aleem Darkwa, or I think they've been talking about maybe Shane Vereen coming back. That might be interesting, but other than that, I just don't see anything coming out of this.
Yeah. Mike, I would say probably the player of the game in this, if not Le'Veon Bell, who had another 100-yard game. He does what he does. Ladarius Green had his best game of the year, 6 catches for 110 yards and a touchdown. Did lead the Steelers with 11 targets by a good amount. I mean, Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown were next with 7. So where do we put Green the rest of the way? I mean, as we've talked about plenty of times, the tight end position is pretty mediocre this year. So, is Green someone you can fire up as a tight end 1 the rest of the way?
Absolutely. He was a guy that he started to see more snaps, and I've always been a question of whether or not he's the next Jared Cook, and I'm still not totally convinced that Ladarius Green is like a phenomenal tight end and that he's a game changer, because I don't think that the Chargers would have gotten rid of him so easily in free agency, and I don't think it would have cost them too much to keep him. But what I actually did a Periscope this morning to try and answer some questions because I just wasn't going to have very much time all day, so I just wanted to get them out of the way. And I received an awful lot of questions on Ladarius Green, and I said that he was in play for GPPs, that he wasn't playing very many snaps. It was 14, 12, and 8 snaps in the 3 games coming into this. But the thing was, he was running pass routes on almost every one of those. There were only 4 snaps where he didn't run a pass route on those. So he was running pass routes. So I said, if you could see him getting up to that 25 snap range, he's absolutely in play, because that means he's running, 20, 25 pass routes a game. So that's definitely worth it. And looking at it, he played 35 snaps this game. He ran 26 routes. So he's definitely in play. There's a lack of options in Pittsburgh. Outside of Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, as much as I love Le'Veon Bell, there's no reason your running back should go out there and see 10 to 12 targets a game like he was seeing for a little while in there. They're going to wear him out. So getting Ladarius Green, adding an option to the passing game, it's going to help take some of the pressure off Le'Veon Bell, which it kind of stinks for his fantasy value. But at the same time, you're getting another player like Ladarius Green who's going to sneak into that question of tight end 1 territory. It's like, you're going to have to question yourself, do I start Ladarius Green or do I start Martellus Bennett? That's a question that's a tough one for me because I think they both do offer you the touchdown upside just because they're quarterbacks. So that's a tough one for me. But this was easily his best career, the game of his career. So coming into this game, I want to say he had never had a game over 81 yards. So it's definitely something to build upon.
There you go. All right, let's move on then. Let's go to the Chargers and the Bucs. The Bucs win 28-21. Daniel, I know me and Mike have talked about this, but I think we finally need to acknowledge that Doug Martin of 2016 is not the Doug Martin of 2015. He had 17 carries today, only 45 yards, did add a touchdown, but ever since he's come back from that injury that knocked him out for most of the season, he just hasn't been good on a per carry basis. He hasn't had, I think, above 3 yards a carry, isn't it, Mike? In 3 games since he's come back. So, what do you do with a guy like Martin, Daniel, the rest of the way? I mean, it's getting hard to start him at this point, right?
Well, before we get to that, I just want to tell you guys about what just happened in the Panthers-Seahawks game.
I hope
Derek Anderson took the first snap at quarterback instead of Cam Newton. Nobody's really sure why. And the very first snap was an interception, and the Seahawks now have the ball in like the 5. So I'm going to be watching Twitter to see why Derek Anderson started at quarterback. But, sorry, Doug Martin. He's in his 5th year, and there have been 5 Doug Martins. There's been the exciting rookie, the dependable workhorse of last year, the disappointment of his 2nd year, the hurt guy of his 3rd year, and this enigma we have this year. We're gonna go into next year. He's probably going to be the Tampa Bay #1 running back going into the season, and I'm going to have no bleed clue where to rank him. You can't put him into your top 5 or 10 running backs, but you can't ignore him altogether because he's going to have the job and he has that history. I think he's going to be a mid-level running back too, and you're going to be sad when you draft him and either dump him or celebrate by week 7.
I think it's lack of options in the offense, to be honest with you. There's only so much that Mike Evans and Doug Martin can do. Like our analysts at PFF have graded Doug Martin as playing pretty well this year, actually. Looking at it, he's averaging 3 yards per carry on the season, 2.6 yards after contact, which means his offensive line isn't doing much for him. And honestly, he's probably seeing a lot of stacked boxes because outside of Mike Evans, who are you concerned about in this passing game? Like Adam Humphries, he doesn't concern you. Russell Shepard, he doesn't. Cecil Shorts? No. So that's what I'm saying. Is just like I would love to see the numbers. I don't have access to those numbers, but I'm sure at PFF we do somewhere to see how many times that he faces 7, 8 men in the box where it's like compared to other running backs. Because like I said, our analysts grade him well, so obviously they're seeing something that we're not in the stat columns. Doug Martin, the reason that you kind of have to start him every week is because he's seeing so many touches, at least 16 carries in every single healthy game this year, even though in all of those games he's never topped 3.8 yards per carry. This week was a funny one because the Chargers have been really good against the run this year, like better than people think, despite the fact that they were like the worst in the league last year. They're one of the better teams against the run this year, but they did allow touchdowns. So this was actually a week I did like Doug Martin just because of the matchup and that the one part where he struggled to find the end zone was something that San Diego did allow. So,
yeah. Okay, let's wrap things up with Cardinals and Redskins. The Cardinals win 31-23. Mike, what do we do with Carson Palmer? He's so frustrating because he can have those games like last week with Minnesota where he just looks like a shell of his former self. And then today, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. I mean, where he can turn in some pretty decent performances still. So what do we do with that? I mean, last year he was a bona fide top 10 quarterback, but this year, I mean, it's a roller coaster starting him.
I think it is a roller coaster, and honestly, I think that's where we're at in Carson Palmer's career. And it was a little concern of mine last year. Carson Palmer was a quarterback who wasn't drafted in any fantasy league. Like I went back and looked through the last 3 years he had played, and he was drafted as the quarterback 19 or quarterback 20, which is essentially non-drafted in most 10, 12-team leagues. So to see what he did last year was kind of magical. And honestly, if you look at over the course of his career, it was an outlier in what's been a pretty mediocre career. So I think Carson Palmer, if anything, it's like welcome back to Carson Palmer and not so much like where's the Carson Palmer that we know. And I think last year was more of an outlier in his career than anything. And it's really sad, too, because he's probably a guy that should have more time to pass than most people because of David Johnson and what David Johnson's been able to do for him. Like, alleviate the stress. Like, this guy is ridiculous. 27 touches today, 170 yards, 2 touchdowns again. Like, David Johnson's ridiculous. And
yeah, that's just another day at the office for him.
Yeah, their defense is so good. Like, this Arizona Cardinals team, there's no reason that they should be 5-6. This should be a team, if Carson Palmer was a competent NFL starting quarterback this year, the Cardinals should be a team that is maybe 8-3, 8-4.
Yeah. All right, Daniel, on the other side, you've got Washington. I want to ask you about the Washington receivers because it's one of those that from week to week, we don't really know who's going to be the top target there. Like, for example, this week, Pierre Garçon led the Redskins receivers with 7 catches for, I think, 76 or 78 yards. And, and you had Vernon Davis, who, we should note, had a pretty decent day in place of Jordan Reed. I mean, I think he's a decent streamer option at this point. But, Kirk Cousins is a pretty good fantasy quarterback who will benefit some receivers. So who's the best one to own out of the bunch at this point?
I still think it's Jamison Crowder. I say that bitterly because I'm pretty sure he is going to end up having cost me a playoff spot in one of my leagues with that touchdown he scored. But, he got the touchdown today. He had the second most targets, and granted he only caught 3 of the targets he had, but he's been the most consistent guy in that offense. Deshaun Jackson had 59 yards. It was on one play. That was an amazing play. It was fun to watch, but it's one play, and that's all he's doing these days. Garçon's going to have these 7 for 78, but he also has 3 straight, 2 for 15 games or whatever. I would, if I'm ranking the receivers, it's Crowder, Jackson, Garçon. If you tell me that Jordan Reed's going to be out a while, just to put Davis in there, I'd probably put Davis above, probably second on the list, just because the tight end position is so sad. But it's Crowder for me first overall.
Okay. And another note, we should say Rob Kelley had a decent day against a pretty tough defense. I mean, not many yards, but I think he had a 4.5 yards per carry. So, which a lot of people were fading Kelley because he was going up against such a good defense, but actually ended up doing pretty well. And Cousins, I think, ended with 270 and a touchdown and interception. So we'll have to check who the top 12 fantasy quarterbacks were to settle the bet that we had on the other podcast with Brandon and Dan, because they bet Kirk Cousins would not be a top 12 fantasy quarterback this week. So.
Kirk Cousins had a rushing touchdown, so I'm willing to bet that.
No. Oh, no.
As it stands, he's 6th. So I think,
okay. We're done. Look, even if Ryan Fitzpatrick goes off and the other 3 quarterbacks do well, then that's still 10.
Hey,
so.
the Panthers are using 2 quarterbacks, so we'll see.
Ooh, good point. Ooh, that could be fun. All right, Dan.
Because, Cam Newton's on for the second drive. Such a weird thing.
Wow.
Well, they're doing like what some colleges do, and they're just going to rotate the quarterbacks out so you don't know what you're going to get.
Maybe he had to pee.
Maybe
Cam Newton.
Twitter said there was something disciplinary. He was getting punished for something by missing the first drive.
Oh no! Well, we'll figure out what that is in time for the next episode of the podcast. But until then,
cliffhanger.
Yeah, perfect. Tune in next time. But until then, for Daniel Kelley and Mike Tagliere, I'm Michael Moore, and we'll see you the next time on the Fantasy Slant.